Shirali, we'll just wait for 1 minute till the time I can see some numbers increasing. You tell us, then I'll start off with that. Okay, we start.
Yes, we can start.
Okay, very good morning to all of you and good afternoon in India. We have very interesting participants logging in, and the time they keep on logging in, and we start our event today here. Welcome to the webinar being organized by School of Water and Waste, Center for Science and Environment, New Delhi. This is part of the series of webinars we organize as a part of cross-learning and experience sharing with global experts and try to mainstream innovative policy and practice in India and across the global south. So Shivali, would you share with us the presentation, my presentation? And,
Sure.
So today the theme of the webinar is going digital in stormwater management towards water sensitive cities. Next. And we have eminent speakers who have agreed to share their experience. Professor Pavel Lesner from Wrocław University of Science and Technology, Poland, and Jack Dawelski, director at Practitioner, Poland. And we have Professor Gosai from IIT Delhi. We have Vijay Chaurasya, CPH, EO, Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, Government of India. And I would be anchoring this webinar today and the discussions. Next. The entire webinar is organized starting with my welcome address, talk by Pavel, and then we would have Jack taking over for 10-15 minutes, trying to say that how that entire thing works in practice on ground, followed with discussion where Professor Gosai and Vijay would talk about the relevance of similar approach in India. And then we will open up for question and answer session. And for the information of all participants, we are expecting that just next to the chat, there is a Q&A button where you would have to post your questions. And I would pick up the question and answers and request the speakers to respond to that. So you could introduce, you can write the question and give your name and organization name and country such that I can announce it from here, the question. There are three main objectives why we are organizing this webinar. One is that CSC has been involved in mainstreaming water-sensitive urban design and planning for creating blue-green spaces in India and Global South. And second objective is that we want to promote digital stormwater management to help practitioners scale up rainwater harvesting and improve stormwater management for sustainable urban water management, including urban flooding. The third objective is we want to explore the potential and challenges in the applicability of Poland model, PANDa, in Indian and Global South context. Next. CSC has done over 2.5 decades been promoting mainstreaming rainwater harvesting. We documented the approach of how community used to manage rainwater, the distributed rainfall which used to be there, and how institutions took over water management. And we have long advocated for making water everybody's business. However, we find that with the changing time and cities getting much more complex, land uses getting much more mixed, we find that cities pose a big challenge. And we have developed on as a part of our acting as a Center for Excellence, assisting Ministry of Urban Development, practitioners, guides and toolkits, which are a mix of the learnings of the past, which were documented in applying wisdom, how we can capture rainfall, how we can improve drainage systems. Next, we have developed Practitioner's Guide on Green Infrastructure, which is the blue and green spaces for improving water quality and quantity. We have also developed the Practitioner Guide for Water Sensitive Urban Design and Planning. This whole work has been basically as a part of a mainstreaming reform agenda in India, in Indian Smart Cities and Amrut program, where 500 cities are targeted to achieve sustainable water management. And we strongly believe that decentralized and cost-effective technologies play a vital role in the global south. And also there is a need for capacity building of training of real users and implementers. We need to experiment, practice, and scale up. We also need to learn from various other parts of the world how they're addressing these issues. So I was invited by in Europe and Poland to share the Indian experience, how we have it has become a community movement of mainstreaming rainwater harvesting. And I learned over there, it's not just that we have to go and tell in Poland or Europe that what we have done. However, we also have a cross learning which is available, that in other countries where institutions have taken over, there is a sophisticated technology available. We also have a cross learning possible. So with this background, we started thinking about this cross learning webinar. It was thought to be a virtual meeting whereby the experts were to come to the ministry and work with Smart Cities mission and share their experience. However, due to the pandemic and the lockdown, we are not able to do it a virtual meeting, and we are organizing this webinar. So happy to share today and happy to welcome 600, 44 registrations from all over the world, 181 cities in 30 countries, and out of which 570 from India have registered. So this clearly shows the appetite of the subject and the knowledge. But I can only say there are two things. The new normal. One is the pandemic new normal, which we are getting used to. Other thing is the climate catastrophe, the rainfall intensities. We all know this past few years, over a decade or so, we have been having this problem of new normal of managing floods and also addressing sustainable water management. So I think I would like to welcome all the participants from all over the world who are attending. Thank you very much. And I request our first speaker, Pavel, to take floor and present his talk.
Hello to everybody. It's my pleasure to have such a huge audience. Actually, I'm really stressed, most of all because English is definitely not my mother language, so you have to account for it. But let's start. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way we prepared the Polish Atlas of Rain's intensities, which has an acronym of PANDa in Polish language and Paris in English. Actually, this project was motivated mostly because of the reasons that you see on this picture. First of all, we believe that our climate is changing. Basically, we have proofs that our temperature, global temperature, is increasing. Whereas, surprisingly, if you see this picture, in Poland, we still are using the information about the maximum rainfall intensity that is based on the data which is actually before the industrialization has occurred. I mean, until now, we are using something which is called a Błaszczyk model in Poland, which is based on the data from only one city, capital city of Warsaw, and was assumed just after Second World War II as the model that could be used globally in whole Poland. Of course, Poland is not India, it's much smaller, but still it's a moderate-sized country in Europe. And we believe that also in Poland we have some coastal area and we have also some mountains, and there is some change in the intensity of the precipitation between both areas. And most of all, we also believe that the increase of temperature, the change of our cities has something with intensities. So we believe that we need to have more credible and more current data. And this is the reason that motivated us most of all to develop PANDa model or PANDa Atlas as a source of information for engineers. As you can see, the history, the real history starts from the rational method that was developed in 1851, and nothing has changed. I mean, in most of the design that we are doing as engineers, we still believe that the maximum outflow is just the product of the surface of the catchment, the runoff coefficient, and most of all, the intensity of rainfall. And since the time of the Talbot, we still believe that this intensity of the rainfall should be based on the probability, occurrence of a rainfall, and based on the time duration of rainfall. So basically, since this more than 100 or 150 years of history, we are using IDF and DDF models. So basically, the relations between intensity and frequency and duration of rainfall. The trick is that nowadays we should have this information more spread, more current, and actually this information should be updated. A good example is what we have already in Europe, which is basically the KOSTRA German Precipitation Atlas. As you can see, this is the publication that is being updated like about every 10 years. And it makes sense because, as you can see, we are at the stage of very intensive climate change. This is the scientific reason that it makes sense to make such an analysis. And there are two other reasons which are not shown on this picture, and they are very pragmatic. First of all, in those 100 years of the history, or even 150 years of the history, we have changed the philosophy of our drainage systems. It's not any longer, as in the times of Mulvaney or Talbot, the strategy to collect and drain our cities. Now we should build the retention. We should think about using the water, the rainwater, as a resource. So if we would like to do it, we need to have the information about the intensities for longer durations. You have to know that, for example, Błaszczyk model or even the Talbot model was only made for short durations of rainfall, up to 2 hours or 3 hours. Nowadays, we need to have information, for example, for a daily or 2-day or 3-day precipitation. This is one reason. And the other very pragmatic reason is that in Poland, and I believe in many countries, most of the infrastructure, rainwater infrastructure, is based on the investment that are made as a public tenders. Those tenders in Poland mostly are made in the formula of so-called yellow feeding. So it means that you have to design and build infrastructure. And if you don't have a credible source of information about IDF IDF curves or DDF models, basically always the companies that are in the tenders, they try to cheat and they try to present smaller design because it costs less money. And this is a thing that has to be changed. So the question is, what could we make better nowadays? So first of all, we have better resources of information. We have electronic gauges. We have, most of all, which is very important also in this project, we have network of gauges instead of single devices. Another important thing is that we have brand new sources of information like C-band radars, estimates of rainfall, and we can use them. Actually, we can process the data fully digital, which is also very important. Another thing is that we are living in a really nice period of a time when we have a global increase of knowledge about geostatistics. So basically, we are now ready to plot the maps based on geostatistical methods. Finally, of course, we are very welcome to use probabilistic models, so we can fit the theoretical distributions. We don't need to use the physical equations that were very simple and very limited. Finally, we have the most important thing that we can do is that we can deliver our results in digital format, and this is something that would be covered by my colleague, by Jacek. Actually, our PANDa project, which has an English acronym PARIS, was possible because we have received a grant that was co-funded by EU funds. This was actually the project realized by Retentia.pl, a Polish company, a startup company, with close collaboration with EMGW. This is our National Weather Service. This is Institute of Meteorology and Water Management. And that was extremely important because our goal was to process the data from the network of 100 gauges, and our dream was to analyze the continuous 30-year record of precipitation at high resolution, not worse than 10 minutes of resolution. Actually, the whole project had like 3 basic milestones. In 2016, the trick was to prepare the digital database with the rainfall time series. In 2018, our goal was to establish 100 DDF models in order to select suitable distributions for modeling maximum rainfall precipitation in Poland. And the most important step, the last one, it was to perform geostatistical simulations in order to have a map, to have a real atlas of rainfall intensities covering all the Poland, and to develop digital platform on web that would distribute the result of our project. And this last part is, of course, covered by my colleague, by Jack. What was the source of the information that we used? Actually, I believe the situation is in Poland was quite similar as in many other countries. In the last 30 years, we had some change of instruments that are used on our National Weather Service network. Let's say before the year 2000, it was most of all based on the manual instruments, on the pluviographs that you see on the upper side of this picture, whereas nowadays the data comes from electronic gauges. Those are, as you can see, simple tipping buckets. So the real challenge of the first phase of the project was basically to digitize the paper strips records. So in order to do it, we have scanned all these paper strips, we have calibrated them, and basically we have digitized them in a software. And that was like almost 60% of our database. We have, of course, connected all the records of the paper strips, and we have formed the annual rainfall time series. And then, as the last part of this research, we wanted to test the quality of it. And in order to verify the structure of the rainfall time series, we have used the fast Fourier transformate in order to see the spectra of the series. This is only a small part of the results that we have obtained. You can compare the annual time series spectra for digitized and tipping bucket electronic records. On both pictures, you see the typical scaling, which is okay, and of course the spectral break that occurs for time durations equal about half an hour. And of course, you can also see that digitized annual time series is even smoother than tipping bucket series, which somehow shows that actually digitalization of the time series paper strips could lead to even better results than original recording of the rainfall with simple tipping buckets. Anyway, we have finished with something that we call the 1 minute time pseudo time series. And since Retention.pl has offices in different countries, in different cities in Poland, I'm sorry, and we were also collaborating with EMGW in this project. Actually, there was a bunch of people involved in the project, and we were forced to work on the same database. So our solution was to develop something which we call the rain brain. Basically, this is an internet database with all the time series of the PANDa project, and with algorithms to analyze the data. Actually, the analysis was quite simple. We were looking for maximum rainfall intensities for different time durations. It was quite easy if we have already had a digital time series. Actually, we used two methods, the standard one, which is annual maximum series, and the second one, which is a little bit more advanced, which is called peak over threshold method. Actually, our task was to find 30 maximum depths of precipitation for some duration in the series of 30 years. And since peak over threshold method gives you bigger series of maximums, we have scoped our attention on this method. Here on the slide, you can see the results of our analysis. Here you have a table with a matrix with maximum rainfall intensities for different time durations. We have analyzed 16 characteristic time durations from 5 up to 320 minutes. And what was important that we were not only interested to know the intensity. Here you have the intensity of rainfall in the units that are on standard used by Polish engineers, that is liters per second and per hectare. But we were also very curious about the dates of those maximum events. Why? Because we wanted also to verify the maximum rainfall intensities, if they were correct or not. And in order to do it, we have used 3 independent sources of information. One was basically the records from daily gauges. Those were Hellman gauges that were located close to the tipping buckets or pluviographs on the stations. That was a very simple check if the daily precipitation, total daily precipitation is bigger than some amount of, for example, maximum 1 hour precipitation. The second test was basically to follow the records, synoptic records, and to confirm if at the day that we have maximum precipitation that was really raining and it was really a day with storms. And finally, the last one, probably the most advanced and actually the one that gave us a lot of information, was basically to use the weather radar data. In Poland, we have a network of C-band radars that is covering almost all the country. Let's say 98 from 100 gauges were under the coverage of radar. So basically, in the pixels of radar scans where we have had our gauges, we made something like a virtual gauges, and we were able to see the series of rainfall for those virtual gauges. And in this picture, you have an example. This is a gauge in Gdańsk. On the top, you have a series from the gauge that was recorded in our rain-brain system. And then you have actually time series of radar estimates of precipitation for the pixel that is exactly at the same coordinate as a gauge. And you see that both signals are actually well correlated. And of course, there is the last series, which is basically the radar quality index, explaining you, providing you information about the quality of the radar estimate. The only one problem was that we did not have the data for 30 years of a project, because actually the network is working correctly since 2007. I mean, the radar network is not having such a huge database as of a comparable length as in case of gauges that we have digitized. So after the process of verification of the maximum depths of precipitation, we tried to fit different distributions, theoretical distributions, to have DDF models. We have analyzed different theoretical distributions like gamma, like Gamble, like Weibull, and finally also generalized Pareto distribution, which we found the best fitting distribution for different time durations from 5 minutes to 3 days. And we made our judgment about it based on statistical tests and based also on information criteria of Akaike. Of course, there is some mathematics. I mean, generalized Pareto distribution has some density function, and basically the message is that if we would like to use this distribution, we need to know 3 parameters for each time duration. It's a shape parameter, it's a scale parameter, and it's location parameter. Actually, it's not a novelty to use distributions. It's also not a novelty to use generalized Pareto distribution for DDF models. But the only one, let's say, novelty that we have proposed is that we said that it's not, we don't have to really find some functions that are describing the variability of shape, scale, or location parameters against time duration, for example, since we would not like to develop analytical models. We would like to basically to memorize those parameters and to use them in a digital atlas. So basically we have memorized all those parameters, and based on them we are able to calculate the depth for a given period of time and given probability of occurrence based on the quantiles of the distribution. But finally, the most important thing was that we didn't want to have 100 separate models. We were curious to know what is the real distribution of the maximum rainfall precipitation in whole Poland. Since we were using the data from only 100 gauges, we estimated that the best grid model that we can obtain, the best resolution would be basically 5 by 5 kilometer. If we would account for the total area of Poland, it makes about 12,885 pixels in total. And we based our analysis on the assumption that we can model the distribution of maximum precipitation based on geostatistics, based on kriging. So the trick was to develop, to calculate empirical semi-variogram for each time duration and each return period, and to see if we could model it by some semi-variance model. And this is only a small part of our results. So let me comment this picture. So first of all, the most important part of this picture is the map that you have exactly in the center. It shows the location of 100 gauges, our PANDa gauges in Poland, and additional 25 gauges in the countries like Germany, like Czech, like Slovak, like Ukraine, Belarus, that are around, that are neighborhoods of Poland. And this is a picture that is drawn for 10-minute rainfall duration depth, and the second maximum. Actually, this is the the rainfall that occurs twice every 30 years. And for those values of maximum rainfall, we wanted to calculate an empirical semi-variogram, which is shown on the picture on the left side. And you don't have to be basically a professor in geostatistics to have this impression that it's a complete chaos. I mean, basically, it does not show anything, any relation, autocorrelation in the space between the values. But this variogram that you see on the left is basically the product of values that are counted, that are calculated for the pairs of the gauges. And if you see for the values of the semi-variogram that are calculated for each pair, you see that in this network of gauges, you have one very specific gauge. This is actually the gauge that was near Dresden in Germany, where the maximum 10-minute precipitation was really huge. Actually, in the last 30 years, there was a huge flood event, and there was in one station recorded a huge precipitation that made change all the calculation of the semi-variogram. So we have used the technique that was developed in geostatistics, which is called masking of outliers. If we, after this process, as you can see, if you would mask this station, you are just eliminating the biggest variogram values, and what you are receiving on the very last picture is basically the empirical semi-variogram that looks much nicer. And to this empirical semi-variogram, we were able already to fit the semi-variogram model based on combining different theoretical models like circular, spherical, exponential, Gaussian. And of course, those models, as you can see, were also accounting for nugget effect. So at the end, we have produced like 418 semi-variograms for 16 time durations and 13 maximum values. And with this background, we were able to develop maps, kriging maps of maximum precipitation. However, basically, many of you may have such an experience that the map that you are receiving from any interpolation method basically depends on the location of the gauges or location of the information that you need. And it's always like that someone could raise the question, how would your map would look like if you would account for additional gauges? Of course, we were strongly limited by a set of 100 gauges that we had in our project, but in geostatistics, we have a method to account for this, and this is called in general geostatistical simulations. There are different methods that you can use, and we don't really have a time to discuss them, but what I'm going to tell you is that we decided to use direct sequential simulation. This is a well-known method described in literature, which assumes that in the production of each simulation, in the developing each map, you're accounting not only for the gauges that were in your basic, let's say, observational set, but you also have some additional gauges that are randomly located by the algorithm, and actually those are some called the virtual gauges in our case. Actually, what you are seeing in this map, this collection of a map on the top, are just following realizations of simulations. I mean, basically those are the maps of equal probability showing the distribution of 24 hours depth for 1 year frequency of occurrence in Poland. And those maps are not maybe similar, they are not the same, but they are showing basically the pattern. And if you have at the end of the simulations like a set of such maps, you can post-process this data. And important thing is that you can receive, for example, a mean value which somehow shows you some general pattern, and you see exactly how it looks in Poland. That in the south of Poland we have basically the maximum precipitation, because here we have mountains and we have orographic effect, whereas in the central Poland we have the driest region, because here is the lowland, far from the city and from the mountains. But of course, if you are processing the data from 100 maps, you can also account you can also calculate, for example, quantize the upper and quantize. And we decided to use the upper and the lower quantize as some kind of measure of the variability of our simulations. And based on this information, finally, we have fitted DDF models for all the pixels. Those models look like this, basically for the durations from 5 minutes to 3 days, and probabilities from 1% to 100%. So basically from return periods for 100 years to 1 year, we were able to develop models that are giving you information about the depth of the maximum rainfall. And of course, this information could be easily transformed to the information about the intensity of the rainfall. And this is in units that are standard used in Poland, liters per second and per hectare. Of course, the models were fitted not only for mean values, but also for upper and lower quantile. And as a fact, for each pixel, for any duration, any probability, you can see not only the mean value, which is our assumption, the best assumption of a maximum depth or intensity of rainfall, but also you can have this interval of your credibility of those values provided by upper and lower quantile. And if you are analyzing this data, this is an example for one pixel of the size of 5 by 5 kilometer, and you have the values of the intensity for different probabilities. You would see, first of all, that the shorter and the more violent is the precipitation. Of course, we have less credibility about those values. And another picture that is drawn also in double logistic axis shows some other observation, which is quite natural, that the more extreme is the event. You have this data for also for 1% of the probability of occurrence. This is 100-year event. Of course, we could not be very trustful about the results that we are receiving, and because of this, you see this wide interval of our confidence. And finally, this is the end of our job that was made to produce the PANDa atlas. And this is the end of my presentation. And the good news is that actually there are many good news, and the most important are two. First of all, this is the end of this presentation. So this is the end of about showing some equations and discussing hard things. And the good news is that the second good news is that everything that was done is presented to the public, to the engineers, in fully digital form. It's accessible at the portal Atlas PANDa, and it would be explained in detail by Jacek. So just to summarize, At the end of my presentation, I would say that it looks like with a watch, that engineer does not has to know the whole PANDa Atlas methodology. Nobody has to know exactly the equations for the density function of a generalized Pareto distribution, but he can use basically the result. It's like with a watch, you don't have to know how it works inside, but you can use it just to know exactly what is the time, what is the hour. And definitely I'm looking for my watch, and this is the end of my presentation because I have some strength time limit given by Suresh. So basically I'm disconnecting, I'm stopping sharing my screen, and thank you very much for your attention. And basically now there would be much more interesting because my colleague would tell you how to use it.
Thank you, Pavel. And Jack,
Yes.
can you straight away go to your presentation? So take 12 minutes, which is fine. We are running 5 minutes late, 5-10 minutes, so it should be fine.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm working with Professor Paweł Liczner in the same company in Retencja.pl who developed this model. And I'm involved mainly in supervision of design team. So we use in practice what was developed by Paweł. So how to use this data? And in fact, what do we need it for? The main reason, of course, is related to climate change. The picture you can see is taken in Poland. Like everywhere in the world, we have the same issues with which we face. First of all is the climate adaptation and flooding. The second is whether we can use the rainwater as a resource, and also how we can prove that our design is correct, how we can measure the risk of our design, how we can assess that what we designed is fulfilling the expectations of the client. And we are using that series of such data to prove that our design is correct, to design the investments, in a permitting process, for example, when somebody would like to connect to the network and would like to understand well whether, or the operator would like to understand whether such an investment can be connected to the network. It's again the reason for using rainwater data from PANDa. Apart from climate changes as rains, we have to also to look at urbanization process, which was also very intense in Poland. I will show you only one example. The city of Gdańsk, which is north of Poland, located by the Baltic Sea. You can see the picture from Google from 2006. I just ask you to look at these red circles areas. You may notice that 20 years before, these were green fields in many parts of it. Some of it was already built, but the way we urbanize the area now is very, very intense. And this will combine with the fact rains are local. Not only local within the whole Poland, but also local within the town itself or within the city. It's a few 100,000 city, and you can see that the CEO of the drainage management company noticed in his Twitter that in one part of the city there were heavy rains, and the other parts were completely dry and not even noticing that there was any flooding. So the main flood which occurred in that city was in 2001, when the upper part of the city had significant rain. Then flash floods poured, in fact, the old part of the city located by the Baltic Sea. And the effects were terrible. Normally in Poland, you would never expect such things, but it seems that they are happening more and more often also in our country. So this raised, of course, the attention to such data as PANDa. The other reason is that in many, many places, the infrastructure looks like that. So we need to do something with the infrastructure, and having proper data to redesign them, to rebuild them, or to plan them in view of climate changes and urbanization is crucial for us. So the first area when we use such data is complex hydraulic modeling of the catchments in cities. And the results are used for large-scale planning for solutions which cover the whole catchment. It may be a few hundred hectares. I think you know such models of hydrodynamic models and their results. These are quite complex tools. They use as an input data the curves which were shown on the last slide of Pavel, or the hietograms. And thanks to the fact that we don't have only one empirical or theoretical number, but we have the whole curves which we can input into the modeling software, and we can run various scenarios with various probabilities, with different durability of the rain. We can test our systems and our designs for different scenarios, in fact. This software, which we use, the hydraulic software, is in fact becoming more and more complex and expensive. So we asked ourselves the question whether really designers would be willing to use such complex methods for every small project which they do. And also looking at India, we were discussing with Pavel what to present you, this issue of water sensitive design, when you have to have a lot of solutions spread all over the country, and not just to run a very complex model for Delhi, requires the data to be available to everybody in an easy form. So the idea is how to upscale, to the solutions which are widely used, and for example, green infrastructure, and how to make it easy for people to use. We could have noticed from Professor Pavel Lichna's presentation that it's quite a complex model. So to make it very easy for people is not a simple thing. So finally, we come out with the idea of a platform which we called Water Folder. It's available, it's starting now, in fact. It's called Water, it's the address you can see on the screen, www.waterfolder.com, which gathers various tools that can be used for calculations, for designs, and which use the inbuilt data from PANDa Atlas. So the system looks like that, or the platforms look like that. The designers or operators can log in. They choose the proper tool which way they want to use. The tool is fed with data from PANDa, and the result is, in fact, the design based on certain equipment or pipes or tanks provided by producers. So in one platform, we connect designers with producers in a very simple, quick way and step. Moreover, we would like not only have producers there, but we also would like also to have some tools or methods of calculations which are not necessarily connected with a certain producer, but allows you to do simple calculations quickly. How does it work? After you log in fact, what we say, we design in 3 easy steps. So first step would be to choose what we would like to design, whether it's a tank, a pipe, or a feature of the water sensitive infrastructure. Then we need to choose the location, and that's the first step, to choose the location, because as we said, the rain data are very much depending on the location. So let's imagine that you would like to design an India embassy in Warsaw, which is the capital of Poland. The embassy, in fact, was built recently, a splendid building, which you can see on the photo. You input the address of it. In the second stage, the person has to, or the designer has to choose the probability of the rain, which we would like to design for, and some data about the land cover, because in that example which I show you, we would like to design the concrete tank, for example, which will gather the rain and retain it for a certain period. So it's like a detention tank. So having the probability, the cover of the land or the plot which is covered, and the limits of at the output or outflow of the to the system. Within a few seconds, we receive as a result a proper tank or a series of values or combination of potential tanks which we can use from the chosen producer. The person who designs can select which way would like to design it, whether he has a narrow space or a big space, whether it's possible to build such a tank, and choose the one he really wants to put into his design, and then download the PDF version of the design itself with all information needed for construction or for the design of such a tank. So with many tools like that, you can easily access the data. You get a real result, but based on real rainwater data in your location. All that is certified by PANDa Atlas certificate. And this guarantees that a proper rain data were used for your design. So coming to conclusions, I think the biggest conclusion which we have is that, in fact, we are all a little bit lazy. The same way works the designers. So if something can be easy to do, they will use it. So if we have a complex model which is not so easy to use, and we have a very old 100-year-old one number for the whole Poland, people tend to use the old model instead of the proper one new. So in order to make it available to everybody, we have to make it easy. And that's how we come out with the idea of the waterfall.com, and we would like to develop it further on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pavel and Jack, for interesting presentations. And I would request all the participants to post their questions in the question and answer session next to the chat and not in the chat box. And they should also mention their name, designation, and the city or an institution. We will take the questions after the discussants have spoken. So I would like to now take this opportunity to hear from Vijay Chaurasia in terms of the potential and challenges of similar approaches and technologies in Indian cities, and does the technical manual and all those things provide for upscaling of this? And then I would request Professor Gosai after that. So 5 minutes each, if you could reflect on that.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh. I welcome all participants. They are present in large number, and also our panelists for making this wonderful presentation that we have seen. Gosai ji is of course going to enlighten us, but one thing I would like to mention that CSC has done a very good job by bringing European Union with them and connecting to ministry, because the type of problem we are facing in the country are challenges we are trying to overcome. I think I am able to see the ray of light here, because similar type of problem we are facing, and they have been able to find a solution, a platform. So I think it is going to be a very wonderful and interesting thing for us and all our participants also. Just I would like to take a little bit about the Indian challenges and problems. We are aware that with urbanization, a lot of bigger cities are coming in our country, and these bigger cities, because they are not very well planned, developed, because of that, this stormwater drainage problem is compounding. And this problem in last decade, I will say, has been so pronounced that thousands of lives have been lost, and also a lot of economic problem has been there. if you see some recent floods like Chennai, one that Mumbai one, that was really matlab, seen across the world, that how much havoc this stormwater can create. Similar incidences of flooding are happening across all cities in India. You maybe especially for Mr. All those international viewers, I would like to say that in India, 80% of the rain falls between the 3-4 months. So intensity of rainfall is very high, and because of that monsoonic rainfall, the challenges in cities are compounding like anything. Because as I mentioned, most of the cities are unplanned, and because of search of livelihood and other challenges, good education, health requirements, people have come from rural area, they have settled, and in many times they have settled to water harvesting catchments or low-lying area where it used to help us to get rid of the stormwater problem. So this is definitely compounding, and noting that government of India is taking a lot of steps, like in earlier taken Jawaharlal mission where stormwater management was a component. Now also we have gone much ahead in form of smart city mission, where we are trying to find smart solutions for various things, water supply, sanitation, and also this stormwater management. And of course, smart city management, these IT things are very much on the forefront. So naturally, this stormwater, once it is designed, taking this digital platform will be definitely very helpful, and it will save not only a lot of life but also traffic signals and a lot of economic loss that country is happening. Apart from that, in Amrut Mission also infrastructure development projects ministry is implementing, and in days to come we can expect that Jal Jeevan Mission also government may consider to approve, under which water security and water connection to each and every household is targeted. Now, this is a very mammoth task to connect each and every person with piped water supply and providing them secured water. So this is the cause, I will say, or this is the opportunity where this stormwater management become very important on two counts. One, for developing water security for the city so that water requirement can be met, and secondly, this reducing this flood problem, because this is really creating a problem, and at many places people have been even saying that a smart city cannot be smart unless even stormwater is not properly and smartly managed. So this has been one region where we have been battling, and to overcome this, recently we have taken to develop a extensive manual under chairmanship of Professor Gosai. He is present here, and that manual is extensively covering various aspects of design, operation, maintenance, and step-by-step methods that how to go about it. So that is one step available. But going forward, the next thing, like in case of this water folder, they have solved the problem. We have also approached to Indian Meteorological Department, because they are custodian of all data related to this rainfalls. So what data they are having readily available is in form of daily rainfall data, in form of hourly rainfall data, and in few stations they are having automatically rain gauge stations also. Of course, very recently they have come with the Doppler radars also, so electronic data capturing is also there. But the moment we approach to them to develop this IDF curve so that we can map, just like this police atlas, we can map entire country, each district and zone with the star IDF curve, so that our designers are consultant. They need not to run for collecting this data, analyzing, and then developing curve and then designing. So that work we have intended to do and taken up with IMD. But the problem that is coming in appropriate form, that data is not available. So here, though I have seen presentations, but I need to converse the experts more and also find out that how with our level hourly data or our level graphs are whatever data is available in form of these automatic rain gauge stations and radars, how we can take data from different sources and uh, analyze using these softwares and tools so that it it becomes useful, and ultimately we are able to develop idea of curve and map the entire country. So that will readily be in a position to serve the requirements of our all urban local bodies, designers, and other things. Second thing here also, we are going to learn that how a mechanism to be developed so that not only developing this facility, but its periodic maintenance, troubleshooting, and as in this water folder, this they have brought to a single platform, designer, operators, data provider, and then definitely some administrator. Such type of system, how we can put in place with help of European Union, and maybe CSC can also actively participate, so that such type of data will be readily linked with our Indian urban observatory that is under smart city and collecting 10 core sectors data, because today data is going to be a powerful tool for designing and analyzing. So here it becomes very, very important for us. And definitely I would like to learn that what procedure and mechanism it was adopted there in police, so that they could collect this data, and how government was involved, and how this system is being still maintained, and plus also how it is different from readily available some software that is available in free. And if we want to go to take advantage of these our learnings, what we need to do, all these things we will discuss separately. So I thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Vijayji, for enlightening us and showing encouragement, saying ministry would like to discuss this further. Professor Gosai, technologically, I would like to know from you what is there with us and how do we take this forward, and any points which you want to highlight. We can't hear you, so you have to unmute.
Yes, thank you, Suresh. Let me at the outset congratulate Paul and ASIC for making a very good presentation, as well as a good job done under the Pavel, the PANDa project, which I am aware of. I think it was is a good project within the problems or within the ground realities of where they have implemented. Now, if we have a similar thing in India, we have to understand that the data which is available, most of the time, most of the cities which the data has been available is at the most hourly data. Very rarely sub-hourly data, you'll find one outstation where you'll have sub-hourly data. Even hourly data is not available most of the cities. When we are talking of 400 cities, I think only 10 cities will have hourly data. All the other cities will only have daily data available. Now that is the ground reality. So our problem is of a different kind, that how to really bring the daily rainfall, the maximum daily rainfall, and come out from the daily rainfall, the distribution which is within the day or within the hour. Because most of the time your urban areas, the time of concentration is hardly around, you need at least 15 minutes data, if not 5 minutes data. And that is the biggest challenge. Now we need to really work on what are the distributions which will be possible, or which are the realistic distributions under those circumstances. And then secondly, the climate change. Now, since the stationarity is lost, all the historical data which we have been assuming to be stationary is not going to remain stationary. The intensities are changing. So how to tackle with the climate change implications of having more intense data? There's another issue which has to be brought in. I think that is where the Indian setting will be slightly different from the European setting, because European, the data availability is much better than you can prove your hypothesis. You can at least check whatever you are using the methods, and you have come out with the methodology which is much better than the previous methodology. But in our case, it has to be tackled in a different manner. The whole problem, basic ground reality of the problem changes. And when you come to the second part is the water folder, which is again, now you have done that, taking the starting point that you had the infrastructure very well defined within the cities. So the data in most of the cities, the infrastructure data is available. So when we are dealing with the urban flooding, the design part is one, the present management part is another one. We have two cities which we are going to establish. So we are starting with the ground zero, the clean slate. That is a much easier problem. But most of the time in the developing countries like ours, is very rarely that we are coming out with the new cities. We are dealing with the same problem of flooding with respect to the old existing cities. So unless we understand that what is the existing infrastructure, and when we say infrastructure, it might be on paper a good infrastructure, but if it's not functional, is of no use. So you are still going to see the problems of flooding. If your drains are choked, they are not having the capacity which was created maybe 50 years, 100 years ago. So that is another issue. So when we are thinking of a water folder of a kind, we cannot wish away capturing the ground reality, which is the ground reality of a city, and then say that, okay, for the designers, you have something you can start with. You can design a new tank without having its interconnection understood with the other present infrastructure. So I think that is a bigger challenge. So we have to really think in terms of how we can, first of all, bring our infrastructure in a digital form into our systems. And that too is not just bringing the infrastructure into a system, you have to validate that data. So when we were dealing with the Delhi problem, the Delhi Drainage Master Plan, which we did the work on, we had the digital. Delhi was the first city which was digitized around 10 years ago. And we were still struggling with looking at the data which was given to us that was not authenticated data. I mean, if you go onto the ground, the data which you are using the simulation models, that data is different from what is the ground reality. So unless you have the authenticated data, you cannot think of giving a water folder kind of application to the users, which will come back to you and say that your thing didn't work because the data was wrong, because data was not authenticated. So I think it's a good initiative, but we have to also understand the ground realities of when we implement these things. What will be the other pitfalls which we'll have to be very, very careful about. And there's no two opinions that the digital information is the only way forward. The things are becoming very complex, and you have to make the things very simple for the end users, for the practitioners. But in the background, they will remain complex. You cannot wish away the complexity, which is there. Something that is what I feel is the only way to go forward. Thank you, Mike.
I think, yes, thank you, Professor Gosai. I think that complexity was mentioned even in Poland case, but however, in India, with the mixed land use and the unplanned plan, the complexities are further more, but also it also demonstrates that at least be made in, when we call smart cities, if they are not going to integrate planning for floods and, climate adaptation, they're going to be not smart anymore. They would be dumb cities actually if they fail to do so. So we should at least make an attempt to see that how we can build this infrastructure, and it will not happen in a day or so. So thank you very much to all the speakers. And I see that we have made a sanctuary, by 100 questions which are there. So I would open up, I would pick up the questions from here, and if they are directed to any speaker, and I would take 10 minutes for a question answer session. and also promise that we would like to address as many as questions. So later on, if some questions remain unanswered, we would get back to each and every person who's raised the question. So I would pick up the questions now from the question and answer session. If anybody has not posted it here, that question I am not looking. So if you want to pose a question, give the name of the speaker to whom the question is, and then introduce yourself. I would love to take that question. Okay. Okay. So from South Africa, Grace is asking a question to Pavel. How to manage stormwater in this COVID-19 pandemic, as the water demand is high in many countries, focusing more on South Africa, as it is a water scarce country. Or maybe anybody else can answer, but it is targeted to Pavel. And what? Okay. Otherwise, I'll move on to, yeah.
Okay, I have unmuted, so I would love to know the answer for this question. But the bad news is that I'm not the specialist in water quality. I'm dealing more with amount of water, with intensity of a rainfall, things like that. So I'm sorry, I'm not able to deliver you the answer about the quality of the water in this pandemic situation. However, if I'm speaking now, I would like to add something to the comment that was provided by Professor Gosain. The observation about the accessibility of the data is really important. I mean, I really understand this comment. It's not like that in Europe we have perfect situation, and the data is we have a flooding of the data. No, it's not like that. I mean, the PANDa project shows that even in a country that is in the middle of Europe, we have only very limited amount of gauges that are having report of a precipitation with a resolution of at least 10 minutes. Okay, so, and basically that it also shows up that nowadays with the introduction of new techniques like radars, actually we are losing our network of gauges. That's something which is also curious, that everybody is nowadays is living with some kind of faith in radars that they are better. So the National Weather Service globally, they are seeking for some savings, and they assume that it's wise to reduce the number of gauges.
Okay.
It's a half and half truth. I mean, really, I believe that in the future, the precipitation models would be produced from the radar data. I believe it's possible, but this is a future. Nowadays, we have really limited sources of the data. And I believe the good answer for the comment of Professor Gosain is an example of American US precipitation atlas. I didn't mention it because my presentation was really short, but probably everybody, or almost everybody, knows about, has heard about Precipitation Atlas 14, which is published by NOAA in US. And it's actually a long-lasting project of producing precipitation atlases like COSTRA, like PANDa, for different states in US. And actually, surprisingly, also in US, they are suffering from the lack of data, especially at the high resolution. So it could be observed that partly this atlas is produced by daily data, which is downscaled to even to 5 minutes. So maybe this is at least partial solution of the problems that are in many developing countries, when of course there is only a basic network of daily gauges. Thank you very much.
So I'll take the next question. There is a question by Purnanjali. How can the stormwater management impact or alter the urban water supplies in the Indian context post the pandemic? Would Chaurasia ji or Gosai ji would like to take up this? How can stormwater management impact or alter the urban water supplies in the Indian context?
You know, it's very difficult.
It is difficult, but at the same time, I think you want to answer.
No, please.
And I feel if you have to see in the bigger perspective, in the coming years, you will find that more water will be required. The demand is on account of the domestic demand, on industrial demand.
Okay.
So a city like Delhi, you'll find after another 5-10 years, you won't have the same availability of water which you are having now. So we'll have to manage our stormwater in such a way that a good amount of stormwater is stored to take care of the demand. Some of the demand might come from the recycled sewage, or the industrial processes will have to be asked to be doing the recycling for their own industries. Similarly, the STPs have to be asked to do the recycle and reduce the demand, which is the urban demand. So there's a very, very, very close link between the stormwater and the urban demand, which can circumvent a large amount of demand, which you can really take from the surplus stormwater. So there's a trade-off which has to be very delicately taken into account. You cannot take away the whole water. You have to take care of the environmental demand. In our case, there's a river going. You have to take care of that. River shouldn't go dry. So I think is an integrated approach which has to be seen, and in that context, this will become a very good small segment which has to be integrated with the total water issue of the area. Okay.
Thank you, Professor Gosai. I'll take another question by JVL Narayana. The question is directed to Jack. How does your software enable to forecast rainfall in the citywide area? How accurate are your forecasts?
Okay. Okay, it's not a forecasting software as such. I mean, when we cooperate with Pavel and we develop these curves and we look at future development, usually Pavel is preparing the data for, in Poland, this is how we do it, for 2050 year, based on IPCC models and changing this data, modifying them to represent the potential climate change according to certain scenarios. So this is from the, let's say, rain point of view, and from the urbanization point of view, because these are two factors which we have to look at. One is how the weather will change, or how the rains will change, and the other is how the land will change. So that's, I would say, it's pretty close to guessing, in fact. Even though we have development plans, we have strategies, but when you ask municipalities whether they will develop the land and how it will change, the answer is they really don't know. You know, if you consider that these plants will be built within, I don't know, 30 or 50 years in 100%, the land will be covered with concrete. So no way we can do them. So it's a kind of discussion we run on every project. And it's not an easy one.
Okay. No problem. So I take another question. This is a question by Abhay Joshi to Mr. Pavel, Professor Pavel. How to overcome the issues of adopting IDF and considering the rainfall intensity due to changing climate conditions? We are also facing the hourly rainfall data. Can we consider hourly rainfall last 5 years data?
What was
how
the
to I can repeat it. How to overcome the issues of adopting IDF and considering the rainfall intensity due to changing climatical conditions? We are facing the hourly rainfall data, and can we consider hourly rainfall data for last 5 years on?
Okay, thank you for this question. I think it's a fundamental question for all the hydrological society. And probably I don't know the best answer, but I know probably I can propose very pragmatical answer. Actually, this is something that was done already by our neighbors, by German folks. They have produced the first version of a coastal precipitation atlas 30 years before. Okay, so basically they based the source of information on the record of precipitation that was already now 30 years old, and like every 10 years they produce the update, because the way that they think is very simple. We don't know exactly how the climate change would influence the precipitation intensities. We don't know really from climate models how would change the precipitation, the maximum precipitation at the resolution of single minutes or even single hours. Actually, prediction models are based on a daily precipitation. The resolution below 1 hour is not accessible from climate models. So the solution, probably the best solution that we can apply nowadays, is basically to update our knowledge like every few years to see what are the trends that we are having. Okay, so we can of course upscale those trends. Other approach that was already by Jacek is just to account for the daily change for climate models and to make some downscaling to the scales that were mentioned by Professor Hussain, that in urban hydrology we need to have information about the precipitation in shorter durations than a daily precipitation.
Okay. So I take the last question. Yes, Professor Vijay.
Yes, in this same point, Professor Gosai, just bear with a minute. I would like to share, because I did my PhD on this same topic, and very recently, so I collected some 11 year, and then to check the changing trend of rainfall intensity with climate change, I divided that data rather than one idea of curve for 30 years. I divided 10 years rainfall data, and accordingly I draw that curve and try to correlate that what is changing trend exists. So in many cases, it was coming 0.5% per annum, 1% per annum, and this was matching with studies carried out in and Europe. So this may be one method that divide that existing 30-50 year rainfall data in 10 years and then find a trend and accordingly project for future. I think that will give a method for this changing trend in rainfall intensity.
Very good. Thank you, Vijay. I am taking this last question. This is by Vishwanath from Bangalore. Thank you for both the presenters. Thanks to an institution called Karnataka State Natural Disaster Monitoring Center, we have 98 weather stations in the city and aiming for 196 weather stations in the city, about 800 square kilometers, monitoring real-time data of a 50-meter well. So there are cases where some things can be demonstrated. This has translated into some design policies and regulations. We have understood that rainfall intensity can be as high as 125 mm per hour for a time span of 15 minutes. It is therefore mandatory for every building to manage the equivalent of a 20 mm rainfall per day, either storing or recharging it. This is now proposed to be increased to 60 mm per day. Is there any equivalent legislation in Poland for each building to be responsible for rainwater management?
Probably I will answer it. No, there is no such a legislation. In fact, the operator, the system operator within the city, is setting certain limits to new developments. And this is also probably replying to a certain way to the comment, very good comment of Professor Gossain, namely the infrastructure which we have is of course not maybe so old as in India, but it also, we suffered quite significantly during the last 50 years from abandoning this infrastructure by the municipalities. So it's in very poor condition and we often don't know how it looks like. So setting these limits allows the designers to do anything because the world doesn't stop. I mean, if we don't set any limit or if we don't give any solution, the world is still building. The designers are designing, the operators are accepting things. So that's probably not the best solution yet because we don't know the system very well, but at least we get an answer. So setting limits, it's happening, but not with legislation. It's depending on, from town to town, it's different.
So thank you very much. I'm aware of for some meetings, I would take this liberty to close the session and want to promise that all the questions which have come, 140 questions, we will try to compile them and share with all the panelists and try to see that if we can answer each one of them and revert to the participants. So I would like to take this opportunity to formally thank all the international speakers, discussants, and I also want to thank Vijay Chaurasia ji from Ministry. And we would like to take this forward discussion with how the Smart Cities mission, we could take up on pilot basis on Indian Urban Observatory, linking this new area of digital stormwater management. And I would like to thank my team, Shivali, Sukanya, and all other participants who have joined from different parts of the world. Very, very thanks to all of you for sparing time. I'm sorry for 15 minutes delay, but hope that this enriching discussion will guide you in innovative policy and practices in your countries and your cities. Big thanks to all of you. Stay safe, safe and take care. Stay healthy. Bye for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as
Thank
well.
Thank you, Pavel. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Vijay ji, and thank you, Gosai ji.